Thanks for coming. Hopefully in the next few minutes, we'll be able to talk about something that will be of interest and of benefit to all of you who are concerned about e-skimming attacks. So as mentioned, I'm JB, and there's the perfunctory picture that has to go with every presentation so they know 20 years from now who it was and what it looked like. So the presentation I have today is basically in two parts. One is we're going to talk about some lessons learned and things that I hope will be beneficial in what we've learned and what is needed from those lessons. And two, where did we get all this information from? What types of products and services were we using as SecurityMetrics that helped us ascertain this information and perhaps help defend against some of these things in the future? So, the data that I have comes from approximately 500 forensics looks. So we have a collection of forensic services, including shopping cart inspect, shopping cart monitor, incident response forensics, and full PFI investigations. So we'll talk about the lessons learned, but most of what I'm going to talk about comes from our performing these services. The first item, or the first real lesson, is not a huge surprise. For those of us that have been into the technology world, software continues to get more and more sophisticated. And over time, things get more complicated, more code is written, more things are possible. So obfuscation appears to be the advancement du jour that we see most often. There are advancements in hacking techniques and ways to break in, but the one we're seeing the most of is simply obfuscation. A small example is the GET request that many websites will run. They'll say, I'm going to go get an image. And included with the GET command, or the request, you can put parameters. In other words, you can actually put a payload in the GET request that will go out to another server and take data with it, where we've actually seen encrypted credit card get exfiltrated from a browser. The next complication that we're facing right now is intermittent attacks. These are a problem for forensics people like us, because we'll go to a site, we'll work on it, we'll see the attack, we'll document the code that is exfiltrating the data, we'll do it again, and it won't be there. And we'll do it again, and it won't be there. This is particularly nasty when it's an ad. So we actually tell people we do not recommend having ads running during checkout. As conscientious as the ad network groups are trying to be, some ads are slipping through that actually are malware. So those are very, very difficult to find. The other observation that we're now making is that the world of e-commerce and websites in general is maturing. There are lots and lots of new tools and toys to play with. So it used to be in the early days that your website, as you delivered it to the browser of the consumer, had content from one or two websites. In fact, early days, it only came from the web server itself. Now we see an average of more than 20 servers providing software that is running during the checkout process. This is a problem, a potential problem, because malware can come in very, very small packages. The worst case we've seen was over 300 sites providing JavaScript code that was running during checkout. What a mess to try and sort through to try and find a problem if one exists. And we have seen a few attacks now come through this method where it came from a third party. An example is we had a customer who was very conscientious about their website. In fact, they were monitoring the software from the various sources where software was coming in to the process, to the checkout process. They had their own content delivery network that they were using for their website. It was one of those CDN services, right? They had an account and they put their software in that site. They whitelisted that site from checking it every time it came in, and they checked everything else. Of course, the hackers got their credentials, broke into their CDN, injected the malware into the CDN, and that's where the attack was actually originating from when customers would visit their site. As big as this problem is going to be potentially, it's not the number one or the largest quantity of attacks that we're seeing in our work. The largest quantity of attacks we see in our work come from fundamental security issues that this crowd has known about for more than a decade. Keep your software up to date and all kinds of other things. That is the number one source of attacks that we're seeing in our work. And you could attribute a good portion of that to what has been SAQA, or merchants that thought they qualified for SAQA and thought that they didn't have to be totally responsible for all of the standard because the validation requirements were much smaller, and so they did very little to protect their own web server. They hired it out, and they didn't watch the security. In the midst of all of this, we had a case that became perplexing. And we have some really good investigators on our team. And they were scratching their heads because according to the data we had, they were definitely losing data. And we were not seeing it. It turns out that after a great deal of effort, we discovered that they were circumventing the secure payment iframe. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not here to claim that iframes don't work or that the secure payment iframe market is about to collapse. That's not the case. The challenge is, and many of us have suspected that this would happen for many years, if you have a web server and a website that is virtually not protected, that all the basics are not done to protect the site, and you allow a hacker to spend their life on the site, eventually they're going to find a way to do something that we don't want them to do. And this is the case. They are successfully circumventing certified payment gateway iframes. Now, it's not the old two-step method. Some of you are going to go, yeah, we saw that 10 years ago, right? They would copy the iframe, make a copy of it, source it locally, post it, collect the data, steal it, send it off, give the consumer an error message that says, oh, sorry, you typed something in wrong, please retype it. Then they would put up the certified payment gateway iframe, and everything would go through peachy keen at that point. Well, this was easy to detect because it happened every time. This attack does not have those attributes. It happens once, everybody gets what they want, including the hacker. If you would like, I have actually come by our booth. I have a website where we've taken some of the code that is used in this type of attack, and I have it on a little demo that I can show you in our booth. So, what do we recommend? Well, the first thing is that there needs to be better security for the web server and the site itself, the development that goes on it. That will take care of the lion's share. In fact, we suspect that with just the scanning requirement alone coming for SAQA merchants in 4.0, that's going to make a huge difference because that's going to bump up a ton of issues that could have been addressed to help avoid being attacked. Second, I'm going to say we're tired of it. Repeatedly, we would take the list of all the URLs that we would find and the JavaScripts and say, this is what's running on your site. And the merchants would go, what? That's not our site. You must have got something. No, these all appear during the checkout process on your e-commerce site. So merchants need to be more aware of actually everything that is running on their site. And third, there needs to be some form of monitoring for the checkout client-side process, so that when an injection occurs or something has changed, we're able to identify that something is now in the browser of the consumer that we did not expect to be there. And fortunately, 4.0 is addressing all of these issues. So, a little bit about how we got this information and what services we're running. So you have to have some mistake when you present, otherwise it's just not real, right? So that was it. We have a product or a service called Shopping Cart Inspect. It is, maybe the easiest way to understand this is a micro forensics, because it's not automated. We use some tools, but there is a forensics analyst looking over the data. Because we're no longer just looking at the server side, we're actually looking at the client side. And so one of the things we learned a few years ago is that many attacks do not manifest themselves until you exercise the checkout form. For example, and this was a common scenario that we witnessed. You would come in, you have the checkout form, you would enter the data, except for the CVV, you would enter the CVV, boom, where did that come from? Oh, software would appear out of nowhere, it seemed like. We grab all the sensitive data now, because now everything, the CVV is typically the last key piece of data, right? So that's now entered, you've got everything you need. The hackers would come in, steal the data, send it off, and the user has not hit submit yet. And the data is already gone to the hackers. So, we in our Shopping Cart Inspect service, we go into the customer site, we pick a product, we go through checkout, we enter card data and the CVV, and we hit submit. We block the submission so that it doesn't cause a bogus transaction for the merchant. And then we analyze everything that happened and produce a report. We have 3 layers of ratings: concerning, suspicious, and the malicious. One of the common concerning items is simply they didn't use an iframe, or they didn't use it properly. We've seen iframes used in all different variations, from they collected the data outside the iframe, sent it to the iframe, and submitted it. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose of the iframe. So we flag an account as concerning, and we recommend they use an iframe in the proper way. The suspicious, most of the suspicious, excuse me, not most, the most common suspicious item has to do with old software, old jQueries, or something like that. And I won't say the most common malicious, but our funnest malicious one is simply a double post. We see the post going out to the processor, and then we see the post going to any variety of places that are not what the merchant had intended. So at that point, we know they've been breached. And we have the evidence and the code, and we can show them exactly where the exfiltration is occurring in their site. So Shopping Cart Inspect is a one-time inspection service. We also have Shopping Cart Monitor. This is a recurring service similar to Shopping Cart Inspect with a few major differences. And I just have to say that from our standpoint right now, and being in security, this is kind of fun, because it's fun in a kind of a bad way, because we can watch the site and know yesterday you weren't breached and today you were. And here's what happened. And we can show you today that we now know you're breached, and here's the exfiltration code running on your site. And we can see it from one day to the next. So as a security professional, that's fun, right? That's our definition of fun. It's unfortunate that we get to make the phone call that says you've been breached, but it's also fortunate that we make the phone call that you've been breached, because it's today and not 6 months from now that they're able to find that out. So how do we do this? Well, remembering the lessons from Shopping Cart Inspect, we have to exercise the form, the checkout form, in order to tease out the malware, the attack. So we turn on record, we go into the site, we pick a product, we go through checkout, put in the real card data, hit submit. Again, we block the submission so it doesn't cause additional transactions. Then the first thing we do next with all of the data that we have is we look for, at a high level, any obvious examples of a breach. And unfortunately, actually in setting people up for Shopping Cart Monitor, we have experiences in identifying for them that they have already been breached because we can see the exfiltration occurring. Then we take and go through what we have and we pick a collection of key activities that occurred during that process. And we write some parameters around that key activity that says if we see this again and it meets our parameters, we're going to consider it good. If it's outside of those parameters, or it's a key activity that we didn't baseline to begin with, we're going to flag it. And then we will run this monitoring synthetic user experience over and over again. And it can be run weekly, daily, hourly, or even more frequently. Depends on what the consumer or customer would like. So what do we do when we get an alert? Well, alert really comes in there's two real responses. One is, you've been breached. Here's the data. And that has happened. It has happened multiple times. Or they have done some site maintenance. They have added some feature, some functionality that we noticed as key activity, and we have now refined the baseline to make that acceptable. And if need be, we'll consult with the merchant themselves to make sure that's okay with them and that they were aware of that new activity and had planned on it. So, Shopping Cart Monitor requires no installation. We run it remotely. You do not have to put any code on your site. It also has virtually no impact because its impact is equivalent to one consumer visiting your site, going through checkout, and hitting submit. That's the extent of the impact. And perhaps most importantly, it works. Over and over and over again, we've now seen this and had to contact merchants the day of or shortly thereafter when we were able to identify a breach. We actually went back and looked a little back in history with all the data we could gather that gave us the insight on how e-commerce skimming attacks had occurred so that we could be confident in would our methodology have identified those attacks. And for everything we could see, it would. And it has. So, the bottom line, Stitch in Time saves lots of good things. And we're excited to be a part of this. So if you have more questions about this, feel free to visit us. Shopping Cart Inspect, Shopping Cart Monitor. We know these things work, and we're excited for the requirements that are in 4.0 that are pertinent to these. And we're here to tell you there is technology today that will help identify all of the apps and software and sources in JavaScript coming into the shopping cart experience, even when you have to go get all of those by exercising the form. And that there is a monitoring service now that is really slick that will identify, based on your baseline of activity, key activity on your site, unauthorized changes that may occur on your website the same day that they occur. And after that, thank you very much for your time. Come see us at our booth. Thank you very much.